Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going through my 5 favorite fantasy books of all time. Some of these are for beginners, some of these are for advanced readers. I actually am pretty new to the fantasy genre. I read my first fantasy in January, and since then I have read quite a lot. So let's go through in order from worst to best my 5 favorite fantasies so far. Coming in at a very strong number 5, we have The Wishing Game. This is such a cute and cozy, just feel-good fantasy. The story in this was immaculate. I was tearing up throughout it. This book follows our main character who is currently struggling financially. She grew up in a pretty unstable home situation. She didn't really have parents who loved her growing up, and right now she's working at as a teacher's aide at the local school. And she has this student who is in a similar situation as she was in as a child, and she really feels for him, and she's been taking care of him, and she really wants to adopt him. He's a pretty young child, but she currently doesn't have the financial stability that would give her access to be able to apply for guardianship. When Lucy was growing up, she found solace in books. She didn't have, again, a stable upbringing, but she did have books that she could fall back on. And there was this specific book series that she absolutely loved. It was kind of her entire childhood. And the author has stopped writing books for many years, but he releases the information that he actually secretly wrote one single book that he will not be releasing, but he is holding a competition for a few specific kids who are heavily impacted by his writing to compete for this one copy. And they can do whatever they want with this one copy. They could keep it for themselves. They could publish it for thousands and thousands of dollars. And so Lucy realizes this is her only chance to get the money she needs to be able to adopt the child from her school that she really wants to adopt. And so she goes to this competition. I'm not going to spoil any results or anything, but it's such a cute and heartwarming book. I absolutely love this. It's hard to say this is number 5 because all of these were 5-star reads, including this one. I could not recommend this enough. It's definitely a beginner fantasy, nothing too crazy going on here, but it's just really fun and feel good nonetheless. Next up, we have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Now, this book was one of my first fantasy books that I read before some Brandon Sanderson that's coming later that just blew me away. I absolutely loved this story. I fell in love with the characters, and the writing in this is just so spectacular. This book follows Addie LaRue. Now, a long time ago, she made this really dumb decision. She was kind of desperate for a change, and so she made this decision, this deal with a really dangerous person that she didn't realize what the consequences would be at the time, and the consequences are that she is going to live forever, and nobody will be able to remember who she is at any point. So they could be holding a conversation and they totally know her, but as soon as they turn their back and turn back around, it's as if they've never met her before. And so she really can't make meaningful connections to anybody, and so she's really struggling through life. We have lots of chapters of her as she progresses through life and flashbacks going back to what happened to make this happen in the first place. And this book is incredible. She meets somebody who actually can see her and remember her, and we find out what deal he made to make that happen. And I was blown away by the ending of this. It absolutely destroyed me, but I couldn't have ended it better myself. I'm normally very much a happy ending, everything wraps up perfectly with a little nice bow on top, and that is actually not this, but I still adored it. I wouldn't change the ending for anything. I thought she did a spectacular job. This is the only V.E. Schwab book I have read so far, but I really need to read her series next because I was blown away by this writing. Coming in at number 5, and yes, this is still in the wrapping, don't judge me, this is actually my fiance's book and he's keeping it in the wrapping for now. This is Chest of the Emerald Sea, which is Brandon Sanderson's secret project number 1, and I was so blown away. This was obviously the first of the secret projects that I read, and I did not expect the secret projects to be this high quality as they are, because these are books he wrote for fun in the pandemic for his wife to read, not necessarily to publish. This blew me away just like it did for everybody else, and this is where I always recommend people start when they're reading Brandon Sanderson, because it's such an easy standalone that's just approachable to anybody. It does edge more towards YA, but it's just such a fun read nonetheless. I adored this book so much. It's about Tress, who goes on this mission to save basically her childhood love. She loves collecting cups. She's just so quirky and fun, and this story is just an absolute blast. I haven't read this in a few months, and I honestly want to do a reread to see really exactly how this ranks with all the other Brandon Sandersons, but such fond memories of reading this book. I absolutely loved it, and it was just such a good start to all of the secret projects, and they have not disappointed me yet. A little spoiler for some books later, but I cannot wait for Secret Project number 4 to come out, because so far every single secret project has been a 5-star read for me, even including the Frugal Wizard's Handbook, which I know is an unpopular opinion. I'm going to talk a little bit about this one later, but Trust was just such a fun, easy start, and I've heard no complaints about this from anybody yet, and myself included. I adored this book so much. Coming in at number 4, we have The Frugal Wizard's Handbook. Now, this book was one of my first fantasy books that I read before some Brandon Sanderson that's coming later, but Trust was just such a fun, easy start, and myself included, I adored this book so much. Number 2, this one's a little bit of a doozy because this is the second book in the Stormlight Archive series, so obviously you can't just jump into this book, you do have to read The Way of Kings first, but this is my favorite of the series. Honestly, some of the other books in the series would probably fit in my top 5 as well, but I just wanted to include one book from the series in here, and that is Words of Radiance, because this is my favorite by far in the series. Way of Kings will always have a special place in my heart because it's the first Brandon Sanderson that I actually ever read. Not a place I'd recommend starting normally, but I did absolutely love it. It took me a while to get into. But because that book did take me a while to get into, the first half I honestly was just trudging through. It was my fiance's favorite book, and I was reading it as a surprise birthday present for him. He didn't know I was going to be reading it, so I was going to finish it regardless. I wasn't really enjoying it up until about the halfway point where I just fell in love with everything that was happening, all of the characters. I loved the world building, but this book was the first book in the series that from page 1 I was so excited to read, and I knew all of the characters, and this was just such a fun, wild ride. I'm not going to talk about the plot in this book just because it'd be spoilers for some things that happened in The Way of Kings, but this one's definitely my favorite of the series. Oathbringer and Rhythm of War I also absolutely adored too, but this one is just special to me. I just really loved it, and I loved the characters that we got a deep dive into in this book a little bit more than I did with Dalinar and Oathbringer. I really like Dalinar, but he's not one of my top favorite characters, so this one was just really fun as we got to know Kaladin and Shallan more, even a little bit more of Adolin. Just absolutely love this book. I really want to do a reread of this whole series, and I probably will before Stormlight 5 comes out, but I'm trying to hold off till then because I did just read these a couple of months ago, but we'll see. They are just so spectacular, and I'm just in love with this world and all of the characters in these books. We've made it to number 1, and my number 1 favorite fantasy book of all time for now is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Now I am biased because I was on the book club panel at Brandon Sanderson's house for this book, and I got to talk about it with Emily Sanderson, which is his wife, who he wrote this for, so it is special because of that. And I did read this book 4 times before going there, so it does hold a special place in my heart because of that. But this book is truly just remarkable. This one is my favorite of the Secret Projects, obviously, since this is my number 1 fantasy book, but this storyline is just so unique. It's so incredible. I loved the character development of both of our main characters in this book. I do have a review just solely on this book, so if you want to hear more about what I liked specifically about this book, then you can go check that video out. But oh my goodness, just talking about this right now makes me want to read it for a 5th time, which is so crazy. Most books, if I had to read more than once, it'd probably drive me insane. But this one, I feel like I could read 100 times and I'd still find new things to love about it each and every time. I just think the characters in this book were done so well. He really made them grow so much throughout the story. I had complaints about Yumi at the very beginning. I didn't think she was a strong enough female lead, but then he turned her into just such a strong female lead, and I just fell in love with this book so much. I'm gonna stop rambling about it because I keep saying the same thing over and over, but this one, honestly, if you're not a new fantasy reader, this one would be my recommendation for where to start with Brandon Sanderson, because you get a bigger picture of his more epic fantasy in this one a little bit more than Tress, because this one isn't geared more towards YA. But again, this or Tress, you really can't go wrong if you're going to start with either of these books. But if you're a brand new fantasy reader, I'd probably do Tress. And if you're a little bit more experienced, I'd probably do Yumi. But they're so good. I adore them both so much. Now for an honorable mention, we do have the Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. I always want to call this Frugal Wizard's Guide, but no, it's Frugal Wizard's Handbook. I am kind of the unpopular opinion here. I know that most people don't love this book. This has probably the lowest rating on Goodreads for any of his books. I'm always surprised when I check it out. I think it's in the 3s somewhere, and most of his books are mid 4s. I thought this was so good. I know that this isn't as epic of a book as some of his others. The magic system isn't as cool maybe. The characters aren't as delved into. I just thought this was so fun. The humor in this book really landed for me, and I could see if it doesn't land for you that this wouldn't be so fun. But this book had me cracking up while I was reading it. I just thought it was just such a fun standalone book, and it isn't quite as good as Yumi or Tress, which is why it's the honorable mention. But I did give this 5 stars. I got 5 stars of enjoyment out of this book, even if it wasn't the highest quality Brandon Sanderson I've ever read. So I would definitely recommend this one as well. And there we have it. These are my top 5 with my little honorable mention on the side. Let me know what your thoughts are on any of these books if you've read them, and let me know what other fantasies that I need to read, because I am pretty new to the genre. Again, I started in January, and I have read quite a few fantasies since then, but there's a lot of big series that I either haven't read or have just started, including Mistborn. I'm currently reading Mistborn, The Final Empire, and I'm loving it so far, but I'm only halfway done, so I couldn't rank it yet, obviously. I really want to read Red Rising. I haven't read like a Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, so there's lots of big series that I'm a little intimidated by just because of how much hype is around them and how much of a time investment they are. But I'm definitely excited to keep delving into the fantasy world because I didn't think I'd like this genre of books until I gave it a try, and then now it's one of my favorites ever. So let me know if you've read any of these books and where you would rank them, or let me know what your top couple of fantasy books are, because again, I am looking for more recommendations as a newer-ish fantasy reader.